Hey everybody, Matthew here, and welcome to my video. This is going to be about the Northern Virginia Association Realtors exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Today's date is August 17th, 2021. The form that I'm going to go through and the information provided is deemed to be accurate as of this date. The Northern Virginia Association of Realtors does go through and update forms every July and January, so do make sure that the form you're using aligns with the date of this particular video. Also, I'm only discussing the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Now, there are other, as you may recall from pre-licensing classes, other agreements like open listing and exclusive agency agreements. And the open listing means anybody can list the property. They could have 15 listing brokers. Whoever brings a buyer gets the sale as the representative of the seller for the duration of that transaction. Exclusive agency says that I am the listing firm, but only if the seller themselves does not bring a buyer to the transaction. And so if you do have a relationship with a buyer, or a seller rather, in which they are saying, look, we're going to continue to market on our own. If we bring a buyer, your company is out. Then you would talk to your broker and get permission to use an exclusive agency agreement where it does provide for that relationship to be there. An exclusive right to sell, this means no matter who brings the buyer, I will be the listing firm and I will be compensated and share that part of that compensation with the buyer agency firm, buyer brokerage. And so, so again, this is the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. I am presenting this information as to the agents of Coldwell Banker Elite. So if you are not a Coldwell Banker Elite agent and you do watch this video, any reference to terms of commissions or company policies or expressly our company policies and our company negotiations positions, all agents and all brokerage are independently able to establish their own commissions and policies and how they interact with clients so long as they're in accordance with rules and regulations. So hopefully all those disclosures are out there. Now let's go ahead and jump into the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. All right, exclusive right to sell listing agreement. This, there's going to be areas where I'm going to spend a little more time than others. Some of these things are simply fill in the blank. And from time to time, when I'm teaching contract classes, I will get an agent who asks a question of like, why, what should I put in this blank? The reason the blanks are empty is because the Standard Forms Committee didn't know what would be the default answer. They didn't have a recommendation for it. These forms are dynamic, which means they are all based on the situation you're in. If you see a blank, you should use your critical thinking skills, work alongside the seller, and establish what is acceptable to your firm and to the seller. These are not necessarily, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for these, although I will give my best to give recommendations for things that I think will help you when you're completing the form. So we start off with the first paragraph. It's pretty self-explanatory. This is the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. It is created on this date, and the agreement is created on this date. Remember that it is upon execution and delivery that this agreement becomes binding. So if I put today's date of August 17th, 2021 in here, and then tomorrow the seller signs it through DocuSign and I send it to the broker and then the broker signs it a few days later, and then the agent or the broker give a copy of it to the seller, the delivery of a completely signed copy to the seller is what makes this agreement enforceable. And that date would still be the same, but it wouldn't be enforceable until actually delivery was made of those dates, and reinforcing those dates. So do remember that it is a requirement for brokers to sign and deliver back to the seller the signed agreement in order for this to be something you can execute on. And so that's the date, and then this will be between sellers and brokers, and the seller section will be all of the legally competent sellers. So if one of them is functioning of a power of attorney for another seller, or if you have an entity like an estate, you need to get with the attorney who's overseeing that, or whomever is the executor or executrix that is overseeing this particular transaction, and find out how should the sellers be labeled here. And just one little tidbit here, because it does come up often. Can one party sign for the other a power of attorney? Yes, if they have a legal and enforceable power of attorney that is specific to real estate and to this property. So very often you have like military spouse power of attorneys. Those are generally not enforceable for real estate sales in Virginia because they don't mention the exact things that they need to. So they would need a different power of attorney specific to the sale of the property. Also understand power of attorneys are only a power so long as the person who granted the power of attorney is still alive. So sometimes mom and dad getting sick will give their children a power of attorney to handle the household, and then they pass away and the kid is still trying to sign for mom and dad's sell and all that stuff using power of attorney. Once they're deceased, the power of attorney doesn't exist. And if they died intestate with no will, they have to go through probate to sell the property. If they died with a will, you need a copy of the will so that you can make sure you defend yourself in case there's a suggestion that you shouldn't have been selling the house. So that seller clause very traditionally is just the seller's name. I would make sure it matched in tax records, and any other seller who may not even be in tax records who are owners should probably sign your agreement to make sure everybody's in accordance. And then of course you have the firm's name, the brokerage's name in the next section. That's pretty obvious. Paragraph 1 is establishing that the seller is appointing you, the brokerage. Remember, all agreements were with the broker, not with the listing agent. Establishing that the brokerage is being appointed by the seller to represent them in selling the property. Note that the word property here is in quotes and has a parentheses. That is to say it is calling back to the next paragraph. Notice it's capital P, next paragraph in property, where we are going to write in or type in the exact address of the property. If you are listing like a new construction and they don't have a address assigned by the county yet, you are going to put whatever your best approximation of that address is in there, and you're going to note that an address will be assigned upon some type of date or condition, but you want to make sure certainly your legal description is completed there. Now, this is not a and or section. Under the property, you definitely need the street address if there's one available. And you also need the legal description. You can't just put one or the other. It's got to be complete. Remember, this is true for every form. Every form you fill out should be complete. And if you don't have the information, let's say this is not in a historic district, I'm going to put a line through that section we are not using to say, yes, we identified it, it wasn't germane, and so we skipped over it. So there's never a question of empty content or unexercised elements of the contract. And so we're going to put in there then the property address, or we're going to put in there the street address, and then make sure tax record is complete. Of course, this will be the one area that we are most likely to go reflect on when we are aligning the listing agreement with the right to sell. And then in your parking space, this is going to be not for your standard detached homes. This is going to be for condos or townhouses or some area in where they only grant X number of limited parking spaces when you are giving the property over. And so the listing agent, you're going to want to make sure you know how many parking spaces is. And you may even want to ask the seller to show you what the permit situation is for that area, just so you can be doubly sure. So, because you're going to be representing to potential buyers how many parking spaces they get. And you certainly don't want that to be a mistake you make and then carry over to the contract, over promising something the seller can't deliver. The next one is storage units. And again, this is not talking about sheds, although there's probably nothing really wrong if you're talking about, the shed you have out back that you put out there 5 years ago. You do want to talk about storage units as far as assigned storage units. Again, in condo situations and certain other developments, they give you a limited amount of storage units or systems that you can put in place to use in there. And this would be the number that you were given, not necessarily identification of the storage unit, just how many storage units you have. And then we also have the mailbox. So if you have a detached home in a standard subdivision, it's got a mailbox at the end of the driveway. You don't have to worry about this. But again, if it's in some type of condo or an HOA where all the boxes are up front, this will tell you the number of mailboxes, or even the ID, if you wish, of the mailbox. In a historic district, remember, if a home is in a historic district and it is sanctioned as such in the state, there may be some special conditions or limitations about a property in addition to HOAs or CCRs that you should be aware of to make sure that gets conveyed to buyers, or to know what limitations are to selling it, if any. It'll be a trigger for you. And then you would list what historic district or designation this particular property had. The next section we're talking about is the listing or legal description. As I said, this is not one or the other. This needs to be both. So you need to fill out the property address information, and then also make sure you have completed the legal description information. Most legal descriptions in Virginia, and especially in the market area we're in for Bright MLS, are going to have lot, block, and subdivision. And so we are just simply going to check that box there and say, yep, that's it. And then fill out the information about which elements we are. And then the subdivision, of course, will be the legal subdivision of wherever you are selling the property. Again, look in the tax records and make sure you have the right one. And also, this is going to be in a county or municipality. So remember that there, for example, in Fredericksburg, there are mailing addresses in Fredericksburg that are actually in Spotsylvania, King George, Caroline, Spotsylvania, Stafford. Fredericksburg gets around, apparently. We are talking about the jurisdiction that has governance over that, not the mailing jurisdiction. So if it is, even if it carries a Fredericksburg, Virginia mailing address, but it's in Spotsylvania County, we're going to put Spotsylvania County in the county or municipality there. And in the deed book or library information, if it's available, will all be in there as well. Now, from time to time, you're going to be selling property that may have been inherited for 3 generations. There's not been a survey. Maybe it's even scarce information, legal description. That's super rare in most of the areas that are served by the Northern Virginia forms and Bright MLS, but it could be. And so if we have a more antiquated piece of land that we are selling or area we're selling, you could actually have the meets and bounds system that you remember, again, from pre-licensing. You're going to want to put an actual description of what's being sold. When you don't have lot, block, and subdivision, you're left with, a total of 47 acres bordered by Wright's Farm on the left, the big boulder in the back corner, the great oak in the other corner, and coming along the pond on the side of the riverbed on the side of the land. If you get something like that and you don't know what you're doing, stop there, check with a broker, find out what the best way to approach this is. More than likely, for most of what we're doing, we're not going to need meets and bounds. We're probably going to have, very likely, a legal description. It'll be just fine. All right. So in this area, as I said, you always want the property information. And then under legal description, it is either lot, block, or meets and bounds. And then we get to the MLS description. Remember, this is the seller's going to be standing behind this, and you're going to take this information and go from the listing agreement to what you're able to put into MLS, and then what you're going to be able to market and present. And you want to make sure you get this information right. This is the seller standing behind you. So as a reminder, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you are released from liability for things you are required by law to disclose, so long as you're telling the truth and accurate, by any information you derive from a governmental source, like tax records or the county records information system. And you're released from liability from statements made by the seller, so long as you had no reason to believe they were untrue or inaccurate. You should definitely have visited the home before you listed it. It's a bizarre thing when I see agents listing homes they've never stepped foot in, but you should know that what most of this information is by visiting the home. And so a couple of things here quickly. When you're looking at this section in the MLS description section, again, this is what you're being authorized to advertise online. The number of levels is the number of levels with livable space. And so crawl spaces, attics that are, just storage attics that you can't stand up in or utilize for any purpose, are not considered levels of a home, only the living levels. Basement, whether it exists or not, yes or no. Basement entrance type, is it a walkout? Is it an interior staircase? Is it a cellar? What type of basement is there? And then the basement, that's the entrance type. And then the basement type is going to be, is it finished or not finished? The attic type will be whatever an attic type is. Normally, most people only use it for storage. Some people have homes where they have walk-in attic, livable space attics, or big area. So you'll put that type. And again, what type of access do you have? The architectural style, interestingly, for some reason, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, every home seems to be a colonial, even when it's one level or not, because agents just default to it. You're doing yourself a huge favor, and your sellers a huge favor, if you actually put the true and accurate architectural style there. So whether it's Rambler or Raised Rambler or Tudor or Colonial or whatever it is, there's lots of charts and graphs out there you can go look at to find out exactly what type of true architectural style it is. Most of your buyers rather, are looking for something unique and different. And so when every house is a colonial, that makes it neither unique or different. And so putting the correct information in there will give you a little bit more attention from the buyers. Plus, it just makes you look smarter as an agent who really definitely should know architectural styles as a real estate agent. The type of exterior, is it brick? Is it vinyl? Is it vinyl with brick? Is it stucco? Is it stucco with brick with vinyl? Is it whatever it is? You get the picture. It's wood or mason, whatever. So you'll put the type of exterior, the primary type of exterior. If it is a 50-50, if it's half vinyl, half brick, put that in there. This is not a test question. You don't have to be exact. You can put the information in there. It's just your authorization to advertise it. It's the seller consenting to what you're going to put out there and describing the property. And then disability access. And just a 2 cents on this. Disability access has varied levels of representation. Just having extra wide bedroom doors so wheelchairs can get in and out may be considered access. Mainly what we're talking about here is ramp access, like wheelchair ramp or cot ramp, like for the ambulance cots that are coming out, to make things easier to get in and out. There are a lot of those systems that are temporary, that are not affixed to the home, that can be packed up and taken away. If your seller is not leaving them, if they have temporary accessibility options there and are not remaining with the property, then certainly don't list those as disability access. This should be what you are permitted to promise and deliver to the buyer that currently exists in the home. The next paragraph is paragraph 3. And paragraph 3 has to do with notices. Now, notice that see what I did there? Notice that the notice. All right. Notices, all notifications, amendments under this agreement shall be in writing and shall be delivered using the contact information below. So this is a pretty important one, that all notification amendments in this agreement will be in writing. So everything that is related to this agreement, all the modifications, price changes, commission changes, extensions of this have to be in writing and then delivered to one of the addresses given below. And so if you only put in the mailing address here, then you are mailing all notifications and all agreements and all documents to that property. You certainly don't want to have to do that unless the seller is just antiquated and that's how they roll. So the cell would give you opportunity to send notices, maybe even by text and attaching a document, which can be done, or email. And certainly email is the biggest one here. Most agents I know in 2021 are certainly delivering everything they can by email. So you need to list the seller's email in here. That is not simply a check sheet for how you're communicating with them. That is actually a legal option in the contract that says I can deliver things to you using those mechanisms. The exact same thing true is for brokers here. And what we're doing here with brokers is this is not you, the agent's contact information. This is for the brokerage. And so you're going to put the office address that you are assigned to, city, state, zip, the phone number of the office. Now here, this particular PDF, as I've pulled it for training, put my cell phone number in there. I would put the office number that's available. And if you're an agent, make sure you double check with your broker to see if it's actually okay to use their cell phone number. A lot of brokers like to use the office number or the main number as a kind of a filter, so their assistant or secretary can cover for them, or they can assign it to somebody if the call's not appropriate for them. They don't want to be getting an irritated seller at 2 p.m. on Sunday calling them about something they've never heard of before and can't help. And so you may not want to put the broker's cell phone number. If you're an agent in my office, put my cell phone number down. That is my office number. Feel free to pass it around. It's okay. The email, again, is for your broker. It is not for the company as a whole. This isn't the primary company. This is how they get in touch with the broker or the firm, the representative of the firm. And then fax, I don't know who's using fax anymore. I'm not sure why we keep putting them in forms, but they're there in case you fax. Remember, if you do put a fax number down, that is giving the seller and their legal representation, should this be challenged, the ability to fax you things. And unless you're I don't know if we even have fax machines, to be honest with you, anymore. Some of us have digital fax numbers we haven't used in years. Next is terms of the agreement. And so just a word about the terms of the agreement here. When we're talking about the terms of the agreement, some agents take great pride in getting long-term agreements. I got a 6-month listing agreement. I got a 12-month listing agreement. Guys, look, I may not want to work with that seller for that long. If this listing is, especially if the seller's already showing kind of signs of being someone irritating to work with or unreasonable, then I want 90 days. If I'm getting a contract on most of my listings within 2 weeks, if my average days in the market is 5 days, depending on what market you're in, for example, I don't want this for 12 months. I don't want the responsibility to have to continue to serve them at 100% for that duration if they're unreasonable and there's a reason why the home isn't selling. So make sure that you are using some common sense here about how long you really do want them to sign this agreement with you and how long you want to serve this particular listing and seller should it not actually sell in a reasonable amount of time. Now, something interesting about this paragraph, the paragraph, you want to avoid putting things like 60 days from the date of signing. Date certains are much easier to follow. So a date certain is on December 29th, 2021, this expires. That's a lot easier for everybody to work with than counting dates or whatever. But if you're being lazy, put 90 days in there. You're still at some point going to have to count the dates. Might as well do it while you're completing the paragraph. This paragraph survives a contract. So a contract survives a paragraph. So if I have this listing agreement and it is good until August 31st, August 30th, I ratify a contract with a buyer, I continue to be the listing agent until that contract dies. If that contract does not go to closing, then I need to do a listing extension or a whole new listing agreement if this is expired. But if it expires during the period from ratification of the contract to closing, I don't need to get a new listing agreement signed. I am the representative of that seller until closing. And so that is actually covered in this paragraph, this part of the paragraph, to say that, if the listing agreement expires after ratification, you don't get to kick me to the curb. You still have to pay me. All the terms stay the same. I don't think it's a bad idea to maybe get an extension if you know it's coming up, but why introduce it when you don't have to if you're under contract? The next part, paragraph 5, is be clear what this is saying. The seller is instructing you to offer the property at a selling price, and then you list the price. Now, you cannot modify this without written consent to do so. So let's say you've been in the market for a couple of weeks. The feedback is that the house is priced too high, and the seller's like, maybe we should lower the price now, or you talk to the seller while lower the price. There are listing addendums that stipulate all the things you need to get that done. Don't do this based on text or just a random email. Make sure you have the right agreement in here, because falsely advertising a property, or, they were like, I didn't mean that. I said by text, and we were just talking about things. That could come back and bite you. So make sure you have the actual list price here. And it's only changed by having the right addendum signed. That should be your practice. Now, again, I will say this, there have been times where I've gotten an email from a client and there's something going on in life and they're in and out like vacation or travel and email. I may choose to use that until such time as they can sign something as to not lose any days and to get that price changed. That is in writing. And if I go back up to my notice paragraph, that would probably cover me, but why leave anything to fate? So I would make sure that was appropriate there. And again, and there's a little note here, just a reminder, Mr. Seller, we don't promise you that the house is going to appraise. This is simply the asking price. We make no warranties about appraisal. Paragraph 6 is the conveyances, and this is going to be a review of what actually is given to the buyer. Now, when we have real property, this is real property versus personal property. And so real property is going to be the dirt. It's going to be the affixed home, counters, and things that are attached to the house that are not movable. Personal property is going to be all those other things, lamps, tables, some smart home devices, but not others. And we'll talk about that in just a second. These things we have to negotiate. And so what this is doing, this paragraph, is authorizing you, the listing agent, to represent that certain personal property items will convey with the home in an acceptable offer. Now, do remember that your listing agreement and your MLS entry is purely marketing, except for the commission paragraph that is contractual. And so if you do offer these things up, if you say, we're going to give you the washer dryer, and we put that in the listing, the buyer doesn't ask for it, or the buyer and seller negotiate that out because the buyers come in low or whatever, the listing agreement is not enforceable to the seller by a buyer. Right? This is the authorization to make disclosures where they're telling you you're allowed to do this. That if the buyer and seller, if the buyer doesn't ask for the washer dryer in the contract, they don't just automatically give it, even if you put it in MLS. That was advertisement. The contract conveys items, not the advertising. So this is still important, though. So you're not offering things which you're not authorized to offer. And so when I look at this, there's things that are already assumed that the forms committee has said. Built-in heating and air conditioning systems, plumbing and light fixtures, sump pumps, attic and exhaust fans, storm windows, storm doors, screens, installed wall-to-wall carpeting, window shades, blinds, window treatments, hardware, smoke and heat detectors, TV antennas, exterior trees and shrubs. And we're going to come back to that in a second. All those things are presumed to be conveyed. They're considered personal property by most. And the forms committee said, let's just put it in their standard language. This is standard. This matches the standard language in the residential contract. And so these things are already all consented in there. This is when you're talking to the seller and saying, here's the things you're leaving. The exterior trees and shrubs is interesting. There have been many occasions in which the seller starts to uproot the tree that they planted because their father passed away and they planted in his honor, or it was a family tree they just planted 3 years ago. It means something and they want to take it, or they really love the bushes and flowers that they put out front. Generally speaking, even outside of the agreements, that's probably real property. These agreements are going to say, no, it's not. And so if your seller, this is the opportunity for your seller to go, oh no, there is a tree in the backyard that I am certainly not leaving here. It's only been there for a few years. It was meaningful to us for a reason, and I want it to go with me. My suggestion always is anything that's not going to convey, uproot it now or remove it now or detach it from the home now. But if not, I need to know to make an exception to that thing in whatever advertising that we're making in the MLS and in the contract in the future. So the other items we're going to talk about here is this statement here. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing, all surface or wall-mounted electronics and components devices do not convey. So there has been some challenges on whether the TV that is bolted into the wall mount, that is bolted into the wall, is considered real or personal property. And I think if we're going to say bolting in something in the wall means it's real property, then bolting the TV to the thing that's bolted into the wall, the mount, is probably also real property, and we don't want to get into that. One of the things that the courts have told us is one of the litmus tests of real property is the agreement of the parties. The easiest thing to defend whether something should convey or not is to go back to the contract. We don't want to do the other four elements of the litmus test if we can just look at the contract and go, buyer and seller agreed. And so here we're having a discussion with the sellers about whether or not they want to leave the wall mount electronics. Now, we think TV all the time, but that ADT alarm panel, the nano leaf lights, the smart thermostats, the surround sound speakers that are bolted into the wall, all of those things are wall mount electronics. And so what we're saying here, unless there's an agreement between the buyer and seller, they are not conveying. So even though they may be affixed to the home, they don't get left behind. That is what the seller is authorizing you and I to tell buyers. And then in the contract is when we start working through the details of this. Now, I like having a discussion with the seller to say, look, the seller says, oh, the Nest thermostat that's attached to the heating air conditioning, that's $250. I'm just going to put a $15 one up there for them. Great, Mr. Seller. If you wish to do that, I would recommend doing it before the first buyer walkthrough, because once they see it, that's what they're going to want. And their contract may or may not be as the home as of the day that they actually walk through it. They certainly don't want to have to double check after home inspection, of course, but there's that gray area between ratification and home inspection that's not really all that gray. So I would make sure that they were aware of each of the items in the house and whether it conveyed or not. This conversation, it may be best suited by walking through the home with them and pointing out everything and going, does that stay or go? Also understand if you're dealing with smart home devices, many of those devices have hubs. They're little plastic electronic boxes. Sometimes they're larger or smaller. They connect the smart home devices with the internet and the rest of the home. If that device does not have the hub, it doesn't work as it's designed. And so there should be a list. If the seller says, I'm leaving these 4 things behind, and your question should be, do they come with hubs? And it can be confusing because like Nest equipment doesn't come with a hub. Lutron does, and Samsung does, and everybody else kind of does. So if they have those devices that they're leaving behind and promising to the buyer, they need to also be reminded to leave those bridges or those hubs, and that should be listed in the listing agreement so that it can be then conveyed into the buyer, the contract with the buyer. And then the next section is the list of items as individual. Is the alarm system going, the built-in microwave, the ceiling fans? One of the things, of course, man, always, it always becomes a problem. Listing agents will sometimes put all, ALL, for the ceiling fans. Dude, that doesn't tell me anything. Is it all that the seller decided to leave the day of walkthrough? Is that all as the time that the house got an offer on it? Count the ceiling fans. None of your houses are so big that you can't walk around and count the ceiling fans. Put the actual number in there. The way the form is written is if there is any more than one, you have to check yes and put the number that are conveying if there is more than one. So if I have 2 kitchens and I have 2 built-in microwaves and they're both conveying, I would say yes to the microwaves. And then I would put over here that there were 2 conveying, right? And so that I would have really some clarity there. And again, because I'm like this, if there is not a microwave conveying, let's say we're not leaving any behind, I'm going to cross through all those things that are not conveying so that it's really clear. Some people, the way that the forms are designed is that you don't have to do that. You can just put no. I really like that visual line through just to be sure, but the X is fine. So either one of those is okay. The big thing to remember here is if it is yes, and it's more than one, you need to add the number. I just add the number. So even if it's just 1, I'm just going to put 1 down because again, I like being crystal clear which items are conveying. Under other is going to be anything that that wasn't already listed here that's conveying. So it may be the kids swing set outside. Again, that would generally be personal property, even if it was pounded into the ground or attached to the ground some way. Smart home devices would be a good example here, whatever they're going to leave behind that wasn't already mentioned in the other place. And then the as is items. So being clear again that the as is items or whatever is going to be conveyed to the buyer in the order that's in, even if there is a home inspection. Now understand that as is, the house is sold as is. Virginia is a caveat emptor state. The only thing that changes that is an agreement for the buyer to do an inspection and then negotiate the findings of the inspection. And so in general, homes are already sold as is. This contract, the regional sales contract, is by default as is. There may be some things that once the buyer agrees to home inspection that are specific things that are only going to be as is. Front door. All right, so anyways, so as is. So and speaking of smart home stuff, my house is talking to me. As is marketing in paragraph C is, do you have the authorization from the seller to advertise the property as is in the MLS, which means we're not offering any home inspections. That really will significantly reduce buyers, even in a crazy market where they're willing to give up a home inspection anyways. Saying the home is sold as is pretty much is sending out a signal, right or wrong, that this is a fixer-upper or has some inherent problems. And so I would not choose yes for this unless the seller absolutely cannot undergo inspections. Remember, that may also limit the number of types of loans that they may be able to get. And I would remind the seller too, even if we do as is, if they accept an FHA or VA loan, they may still be susceptible to the lender's inspections about the property. And the lender appraiser is not going to care that the property was as is if they see there's things that need to be addressed in order to give a loan. So make sure you have a little dialogue with the seller about that. Paragraph D is the leased items, systems, and service contracts. This is a list of contracts that the seller may have on the property. This is really good for you to know up front in case they do have existing, if they have a contract, like an annual contract with a pest control company, they generally do free real estate inspections. And so the seller's not going to incur another $75 fee for an inspection if they have an existing contract. Also, covering anything like fuel tanks or water treatment systems. This is clear here that these do not convey unless the buyer and seller agree to convey them. And so this dialogue is for you to get a clear idea of what's being leased. For example, some gas tanks are leased, security systems may be leased, and those things cannot be conveyed to a buyer without some type of contractual agreement or an understanding between both the leasing company and the buyer and seller. And so that just gives you a place to ask that information. Home warranty information is pretty straightforward. The seller is giving a home warranty. If they say yes here, they are authorizing you to advertise a home warranty, and that home warranty cannot exceed a certain fee that would be listed here, and the provider of the warranty is to be here. Now, one of the things that I want you to pay attention to in this section is that to be determined means you most likely don't have a meeting of the minds. Everything in this agreement should be clear as to what the actions are, on what the promises are being made of the seller and the broker and what we're representing. So if they say yes to a home warranty, you need to put a dollar amount in there, and you need to fill out which home warranty company so that the seller is authorizing you to get it, unless they have one they want to order particular to their preference. I personally find that it's better to get the warranty application signed with the listing agreement so there is no question, attach it all together, and then send that thing off or register it when I get back to the office or at home. And so that needs to be clear in there. Do not put to be determined, put the actual cost and warranty company. Utilities, again, pretty straightforward. What type of utilities there? If you don't know, ask the seller, and they're going to put this in there, and they're signing a listing agreement to make the promises known. But you can usually get some of this information from the tax records, like what type of water and sewer. Otherwise, ask your clients. Yeah, there are clients out there who actually don't know that they are on septic and sewer. They forgot, or I don't know. I don't know how that works, but there's people who've misrepresented this. So you want to double check that, make sure you know. When you get down here, this is for check boxes. You ask this information, fill it out. One of the tricky parts is the sewage disposal system here. And so if you do have the sewage disposal system, is it public? Is it septic? If it's septic, you do not leave this blank. If it is a septic system, put septic and then get the sellers to tell you how many bedrooms it is actually perked for. If they do not know, call the county. This is a huge issue for buyers, and this has bitten some listing agents in the backside before by putting the wrong information or putting nothing at all. You need to put in MLS what the septic system is perked for. That is material. That's a pretty important thing. I also want to mention here that it has been challenged a number of times with DPOR and other places, and the standing ruling has been, again, as of today's date, that if there is a discrepancy between the actual number of bedrooms in the house and the perk, you just need to make that disclosure. So let's say there are 4 bedrooms in our house, but we know there's only a 3-bedroom perk, and you can call the health department to follow up if the seller doesn't know. Then in MLS and in your disclosures, you're going to put there are in fact 4 bedrooms because the house has 4 bedrooms. There's only a 3-bedroom perk. So making that one sentence, I personally put it on the residential property disclosure, and then also in the agent-to-agent comments in MLS, you put it wherever, as long as it's in writing. And disclosure of this issue, and this is a disclosable item, all disclosures need to meet 3 standards. It needs to be timely. It needs to be before a buyer commits so that they know what they're committing to. It needs to be in writing and clear as to what you're disclosing. And it needs to be meaningful. So it needs to be stated in such a way as that any reasonable person reading it would know exactly what the situation was. So saying this home has 4 bedrooms with a 3-bedroom septic approved perk, That's pretty simple and clear. People should understand what that means. And if that's in your residential property disclosure, which buyer and sellers both have to sign now, and it's also in the agent-to-agent comments, you've covered the bases, you've made disclosure, you're fine. And then you're going to put the type of septic system that is with the house. And if you don't know, ask. All right. And then there is also this notice here for the sellers about the septic system. And then the seller needs to disclose here. This is required if they're on a septic system. They need to check one or the other. Again, if they're on county sewer, just put a little line through the whole thing. But if they are not on the on county or city water and sewer, then in this paragraph, you're going to put that it is or is not waiving under a waiver. So waiver would be to say, look, your septic system is failing, but as long as you pump it out every 6 months, we'll let you continue to live in the home. If the state health department has issued a waiver in the house to allow homeowners to live there, generally because they don't have $20,000 for an alternative septic system, as long as they clear it out every 6 months of use or whatever it is, waivers do not convey. So if your seller says, oh yeah, by the way, we do have a waiver here, stop. There's got to be a plan to fix and remedy the septic system in this process. Those waivers do not get conveyed to future buyers. All right, that's paragraph 8. Paragraph 9 is the broker duties. These are basically restating what is in Virginia regulations that is an obligation of listing agents. Most of these can be found in 54, 21, 31, 32, 33, 34 when it lists all the agency duties. And so again, our job is to promote and protect the interests of the seller. And the seller acknowledges the broker is bound by certain laws and rules and the code of ethics. That's going to be important when we get to something else. And the lockbox issue. So in other words, we have to abide by these rules. So if the seller does come back and go, well, I don't want you to do X, Y, Z, you can come back and go, well, the code of ethics, the law, whatever rule says I have to do it. And they could fire you, but they'd be in default in agreement for firing you for following the rules of the law. That you're going to do reasonable effort and act diligently to seek buyers at the property in the price and terms. So if the seller wants more money than what they are authorizing you to offer the property for, you're off the hook. You are only seeking a buyer who's going to work for these terms. And that my job is to assist the seller in satisfying contractual obligations. I don't have to do the things for the seller. I don't have to order insect reports. I don't have to order well and septic tests. I can assist them. I can also recommend to them certain features. Some agents go above and beyond and order these things for them and do that work. That's okay to an extent, but you're not obligated to. This is just saying you're assisting them with it. You're not doing all the work for them. That the broker market the property at the broker's discretion. And then also it'll talk about we're the ones that are setting the description and without limitation description, photographs, and all the rest. It's the seller is understanding they're giving us carte blanche to market this in any reasonable place to get the word out. Now, if you have a seller, and it does happen from time to time, who's like, well, I don't want my house on this particular website or whatever, then there has to be an exclusion written in here, and you as a broker have to agree to accept that. And then the broker will not be obligated to market the property after the seller's received an offer. This actually does come up in conversations where sellers are starting to get a little iffy about a buyer, or the buyer's probably acting normal and the seller doesn't like what the buyer's acting for. And they're like, well, I think we should do an open house this weekend, and just in case there's another buyer out there. That paragraph says I don't have to continue to market. I'm not legally obligated to do those things while we have a contract. We're going to present all written offers and counteroffers to the seller in a timely manner, even if the house is ratified. And of course, if it is ratified and we were presenting another offer, the seller should be encouraged to talk to an attorney to find out if what they should do if they want to accept the second offer and they're subject to the first offer. And again, the broker shall not continue to market, show, or permit showings after the property is subject to a ratified contract unless instructed by the seller in writing. Seller shall account in a timely manner for all money and property received in the trusted broker. For example, escrows, if we were to somehow receive those as the listing firm. All right. Broker shall show property during reasonable hours to prospective buyers and shall accompany or accommodate as needed other real estate licensees, their buyers, inspectors, appraisers, exterminators, and other parties necessary for showing and inspection of properties, facilitate and or consummate the sale. This is not saying we have to be there for every showing. That would be that would be the next line if that was a requirement that the listing agent be present for all showings, which is generally not the rule. But showing is making available for parties and being available yourself if they don't have an agent and they need to get in the door, or your representative, so another agent in your firm. Remember, broker is the entire brokerage. This isn't just you, the listing agent. And so if you're not available and a buyer wants to see it, you can find another agent in the firm or the brokerage to go and present the property. This bold line here, broker agrees to the following show instructions to be shared in MLS, is where you're going to talk to that seller who may want 24-hour notice, or they may want any number of weird things. Maybe they want a 2-hour notice or a 24-hour notice, or in today's day and age, no more than 3 adults in the property at one time. They must be wearing masks. That kind of special, because of COVID, those type of special conditions would be outlined right here. The broker shall or shall not install electronic lock boxes. I want to be clear here that if you say the broker shall install lock boxes, this is electronic lock boxes. Your padlock, your Lowe's $20 boxes does not meet the standard written in the listing agreement and would generally not be covered in E&O insurance if you had a problem, unless you had certain conditions. Maybe you have better insurance than I've seen in other places. But your electronic lockbox is your central lockbox. It needs to be available for other persons who are authorized to see the property. And that, by the way, again, I've said this in many other these videos, your central lock will act as a combo box. You can give temporary codes. You can assign unique codes to people to use. You can send them an app on their phone, even if, as long as the seller's authorized it, even if they're not central lock members, where you can track their access and keep it secure. There is zero reason to take on the liability of getting a combo box that can be opened with a screwdriver from the Lowe's shelf or the Home Depot shelf when you've got this fantastic technology that keeps you and the seller safer right at your fingertips. So make sure you're clear that that's the electronic lockbox that's being referenced here. Broker shall or shall not install a for sale sign as permitted. The seller is responsible for clearly marking the location of underground utilities, equipment, and other items that may be damaged by the placement of the sign. So let's talk about this real quick. Miss Utility says specifically real estate agents you need to call if you are putting in any signage, the diameter of which is greater than 1/8 of an inch. So 1/8 of an inch is going to be the end of these earbuds that you see that you put in your phone, right? That's 1/8 of an inch adapter. And so anything other than the wired directional signs, for example, you are obligated to call Miss Utility. What this is saying is that the seller is taking on that responsibility, saying, this is where I want it marked, and the seller is calling Miss Utility. I'm sure they're not calling them. You can ask the seller, hey, I'm going to go put a white flag or a flag out there where I think I'm going to put the sign. Can you call Miss Utility and have them come mark the area? The seller will probably look at you like you're crazy and want to know why you're not doing it. Your broker is going to look at you and ask why you're not doing it, because the penalties for not doing so and putting that sign into the ground and damaging something is pretty substantial. And so that's what that line is there for. I think, again, you can do it on their behalf. This is saying somebody had the responsibility to call ahead to mark where the sign was going in. That is not to say you don't carry liability as an agent if the seller doesn't call Miss Utility in advance. You probably still will carry the liability. All right, and then we get to paragraph 10, the marketing and internet advertising. These are very wordy paragraphs, but essentially we're saying the seller authorizes or does not the broker to put a property into MLS. If it's going into MLS, they understand that it's going to be disseminated through all the members of MLS and then also the outside of the MLS. The broker shall enter the listing into MLS within however many days you're going to put that in there. So if they're signing today and they were ready to go, then you're going to put it in within 3 days. Or you're going to put a different date in there if it's anything other than the 3 days. And then the seller's basically aware there's going to be a whole lot of marketing going on. And so this outlines some of the marketing that real estate brokers and agents will be doing, and basically getting consent from the seller to do that. Or the seller does not authorize the broker to market the property via MLS. So now remember, if you elect under the Bright MLS rules, if you elect to not actually most any of MLSs nowadays are going to have this. They're going to have a form. If the seller says you cannot put an MLS, there is a different form called the waiver of broker submission MLS that the seller must sign. And the Bright MLS, and this is not something you get to just freehand and write your own. The Bright MLS disclosure has very pointed disclosure saying, you seller, understand here are the damages you incur, here are the limitations you incur by not marketing the property in MLS. And so this form has to be signed as a reminder to you and the seller that that form has to be signed, and if it's not going to multiple listing service. Next, the seller authorizes or does not authorize the marketing to make the MLS data available to third parties, Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com, IDX Solutions for all the other agents and brokers and franchises and all the whatever. That includes, and it lists here all these sites that I just mentioned. So you need to be clear when you're looking at this authorization. The first one is MLS. The second one is if I can put an MLS or not, it doesn't matter. Can it also go to aggregators? If they say no to this, then it's not going to be a Zillow and a Realtor and all the rest, which is where the majority of buyers are going to be. And so some disclosure be given to them. If it can go into MLS and it can go to aggregators, then am I allowed to display the property address? Does the seller understand that there may be unedited comments or reviews of the property for these third-party sites, and estimated valuation models, AVMs? Now, there's some confusion, and quite frankly, I've seen answers on both sides, even from the websites themselves. As a general rule, if they cannot display the address and if they cannot display AVMs, the aggregator has the right to not put the listing out there at all. And so the seller needs to be aware that when they say no to some of these features, they may also be limiting the number of buyers who could potentially see or care about their home. And so the best you can do, for me, I just tell them, hey buyer, or hey seller, I'm going to do my best to use Google Alerts and other tools to keep track of comments and things on your address. But there may from time to time be comments. There may be people sharing stuff on social media or taking the data and doing their own blog post. We can't control that once it's out there. That's part of selling your home. And then paragraph D is the seller authorizes or does not the coming soon status. If they do authorize the coming soon status, then again, what date will be entered in MLS? Is it within 3 days or some other special day here? And then it will talk about the limitations of Bright MLS. Coming soon for no more than 21 days. And then we can place a coming soon. We can notify other agents. We can place advertisements about the property. So this is expressing what we can do. Now understand there is a coming soon addendum that also needs to be part of your listing agreement that authorizes you to do these things as well. So this, I think, covers most of those things. And then also the seller can change their mind if something gets out of hand or there's a problem, and they can give us, and again, it should be written, instructions to change any of those things later on. So E is a little bit more of a, hey seller, you're still in control. Here's what we're putting out there, but if it goes south, you can go and make these changes. Paragraph 11 is a disclosure about who are representing the seller, who represents the buyer, designated agency, which I hope all of you are already aware of before you're watching this video, if that's an option, and then dual agency if that's an option, and they'll say yes and no. The one thing I want to remind you here is that when you're talking about dual and designated agency, this is giving you consent to bring a buyer to your listing. There's still the dual and designated agency forms that have to be signed before you execute a contract. So this does not supersede those disclosures that to be done. This is simply giving you the authorization for, if you say yes to designated, then any agent in the same company can bring a buyer. If you say yes to dual agent, then you as a buyer agent can bring a buyer to the house. Listen to me carefully in this part though. If you're in an office or a company where the principal broker or any of the managing brokers also list and sell, and they are overseeing your transactions, and you say no to dual agency, that means nobody who's a broker in your company can bring their own buyer because they themselves would be dual agents. Remember, your sales manager, the principal brokers oversee both sides of this transaction in a designated or dual agency situation, and you may be limiting those selling brokers to not be able to bring a buyer to the house if you say yes. So just understand the consequences. I myself have never done dual agency. I never will. I don't think it should be lawful. But I understand my firm may be dual agents. The people who work under me may be dual agents, or I may be a dual agent for the people who work under me if two of my agents bring a buyer and seller together. So I would say yes to designated and dual unless there's some true outrage by the seller here. But single agent, dual agency can be denied later, and I would have a discussion with them at that point. And then the disclosure that we're going to let other firms know, we're going to other buyer agents know about our listing and what type of agency relationships that we may have. Paragraph 12 is the broker compensation paragraph. And in paragraph 12, this is where we talk about getting paid. Now, in this paragraph about getting paid, we are going to state here that the seller shall pay the broker a total compensation. This is the total commission that's being earned. So let's say that we are going to get 10% of, and you need to specify what this is, 10% of the gross sales price. And if you do have some type of base commission fee and $375 base commission fee. Okay. And so you know that this is going to go, this is a total what the whole company is getting. And the next line here, and this is if we bring a ready, willing, and able buyer, acceptable to the seller. And the next line here is going to be the number of days. And so let's say 30 days after the expiration, a buyer that you induced to come look at this property comes and brings an offer to you within 30 days after expiration, all the terms go back into place. I'm still your agent. I will still represent you and you still owe us compensation. Now, the exception to that is that compensation need not be paid if the contract is ratified in a property while property is listed with another firm. So you had the listing, you did all the work, no buyers came or buyer fell out. The sellers are mad to go hire a different real estate company, then that paragraph 30 goes away, or that standard of 30 goes away. Again, you can put whatever you want in here. Some agents put 45 days, some people put 60. Whatever you want to put in there that the seller will agree to, you can. Down here under the buyer agency compensation, remember I got 10% total for this, and that's just an academic number. That is not a standard of representing an average. 10% of the gross sales price, I'm going to offer half of that to the buyer. Now, I am not obligated to offer half of what I've given. This is simply whatever the seller and I agree to offer for buyer compensation is there. And again, as a reminder, you cannot represent what other agents will do. You can't represent other companies or firms or their business practices. This paragraph is you and your seller talking about what you are willing to take the listing for and what you're offering to buyers. So don't tell the buyer or the seller, hey, if we don't put X in here, no buyers will bring an offer to you. It's not a true statement. It's also unlawful. So you just talk about what you're offering and doing here. If there is no other type of compensation, I can put no here for other things. Otherwise, as a reminder, compensation is to be shown a percentage of the gross selling price, a definite dollar amount, or in for no compensation. So this is just a reminder. I like putting gross sales price up here, but even if you don't, it's covered in the italicized area. And then there's our disclosure, antitrust disclosure, that the compensation is between brokers. It's not fixed, controlled, or recommended by any other party. Paragraph C is variable rate commission. Variable rate commission is when the buyer, when you, the broker, and the seller have said, if some future action happens, the commission is changed. And so for, let's say, the seller, being wise, says, I'm not really down with that whole due agency, but if we are going to do it, I'm going to reduce the commission. I'm not paying full commission for half of the services. And so you can put, in case of dual agency, the commission, the total commission is reduced to, let's say, 5%. of the gross. All right. And so that can be our variable rate. Now, remember that we teach this in other classes in ethics, but if you do have a variable rate condition, you have to disclose that one exists in MLS. You don't have to disclose what it is, just that there is one. Generally speaking, this doesn't happen very often. If you can get a seller to agree to dual agency, you're probably not giving the full picture anyways, but if you do in the full picture, then they are going to, they're going to have some questions about how compensation is made, but generally that comes later when you bring the offer, not during this period. And then the retainer fee, if you do charge a retainer fee, most of us don't. If you don't charge a retainer fee, then you can just cross through that and go, hey, our company doesn't charge a retainer fee. That's in there because some companies do. If you do charge a retainer fee, get with your broker, make sure it's consistent and that you are following all applicable rules. Early termination fee is different. You can put whatever number you want in here. I tend to put whatever I think I'm going to spend at least at a minimum on marketing in there, maybe more, and say this is a penalty. You can, if you don't want to continue listing, you just want to terminate our agreement, and it's not because I failed to do something or I abandon you. This is the amount of money it's going to cost you to terminate our agreement, and then they can agree whether they're going to do that or not. And then you can put a fee in there. Again, I do like putting some fee in there. It doesn't have to be large. It can be just enough to cover some of my marketing fees. Every agent, you all are willing to negotiate. I'm putting $1,500 in there for training purposes only. You are free to negotiate that however you wish. All right. This is a reminder to the salesperson that we are going to keep everything in confidential status. So we're not going to share anything with anybody, and that we have a right, or we have the obligation to preserve that information, except if we learn about a latent material defect. If we know about something that's wrong with the property, we must tell buyer agents and make disclosures. That's the law. Authorization to disclose other offers. So paragraph 14 is talking about the listing agent as representing the sellers under Code of Ethics, Standard Practice 113 and 115. We have the right with the seller's directive to share any and all terms of offers with competing agents. And so if a buyer agent comes and brings an offer and it's okay, and a second buyer agent comes in, I can actually deliver a copy of the first offer to the second buyer agent and go, can you do better than this? Or I can give them bits and pieces. I can negotiate however I wish with that information. The seller has to authorize me to do that. And so the language in here that can be somewhat confusing is the broker may not disclose without seller's authorization the existence of other offers on the property. It doesn't explicitly say the terms and conditions. We derive that from other sources. The Code of Ethics, for example, tell us that there is no prohibition in law at all about us having to keep offers in confidence. As a matter of fact, you work for the seller. So whatever you're lawfully able to do to negotiate the higher, better price for the seller, you should do with seller's consent, knowing that may come with some risk as well. If you start disclosing too much, you may have equipped a buyer who was ready to come in a full-blown, great, fantastic offer. They see the other offer and go, well, I only have to be better than that. I don't have to be as good as I was going to be. And you may actually damage yourself. So this is part of negotiations. We do lots of training on negotiations, specifically on how to handle multiple offer disclosures and other training. Make sure you take those classes and keep up with that. It can be complex to some folks. Compliance with fair housing. We're going to tell the seller we have to comply with all fair housing rules and laws. And then you can go through your fair housing rules and laws. Do understand this form will be updated. Yes, because last July, Virginia passed, after 10 years after the Code of Ethics did, sexual orientation is also a protected class. So both your Code of Ethics standards and the law, they're covered in here. So we don't really have to update the form because it says any other laws or all other laws covered in the Commonwealth or our local jurisdiction or the Code of Ethics. So make sure you disclose all those with the clients and go over them. Paragraph 16 is the relocation program. Do they benefit from it? Yes or no? They're going to check the box. They're going to outline all the relocation information. This is a great place to make sure you are asking this. Don't skip over it. And if they say no, you're good. If they come back later and go, you know what, I did have this relocation benefit, I didn't even think about using it, then you're not going to feel obligated to compensate or give up a big chunk of commission or whatever for that. If you do stop here and they go, yes, we are beneficiaries, then you deal with that however you can, right? Whatever your company policy is, or whatever the program policy is. Some programs we have to abide by because our company is a member of that beneficiary program, so we have to offer it and honor those terms. Others, we can offer other incentives to not enter the system as a relocation client. So make sure you know what those programs are. If you don't, check with your broker. They'll be able to hook you up with some explanations. This is our paragraph 17 is our condominium paragraph, which if it is in a condo, we will check whether it is or is not in a condo in the area. We will talk about the fact that there are some regulations about it, and we will check whether the seller or the broker is obligated to order the disclosure packet. You do you. Whatever you, the agent, feel comfortable doing. I prefer the seller to handle it, to pay for it, to order it, and then give it to me, and certainly prefer it to be in digital copy where I can send it to as many buyers as I want to, so long as it's current. And I would also strongly suggest to always, regardless of the market, do this at the time of listing. It is awesome to deliver HOA docs the date of ratification and get all that crap out of the way if they're digital. If they are printed only by the association, then you got one copy. You're probably going to wait to after inspections and then hand deliver that copy, or however the contract tells you to deliver it. And then, of course, it's fill in the blank about any of the other conditions that you need to disclose about the condo. Don't, again, leave this empty. Do not leave it empty. Make sure you're filling this out, because this is what you're going to be putting in the MLS to offer to parties. And those buyers will get super ticked off if you put the wrong number in there and it come to find out they got to pay more money than they thought. So make sure you're putting the appropriate information about the condos in there. Property owner association, exact same thing as the condo association. All the information is the same. Property condition, this is where we're going to talk about the residential property disclosure, whether this is an exempt or not. If the owner has lived in the house at any period of time, they are probably not exempt. There's a long list of exemptions in the law if you want to look at it. For the most part, your property is not going to be exempt for a residential property. So you're going to put it as not exempt from the act, and then fill out the appropriate form. And here's a great statement. The seller shall indemnify, save, and hold broker harmless from all claims, complaints, disputes, allegations, judgments, and attorney's fees arising from any incorrect information supplied by the seller or the seller's failure to disclose material adverse fact. That statement is basically saying, look, if you get sued because you didn't tell us something, or you gave us the wrong information or even lied, you're on your own. We're not your liability shield. You're holding us harmless. Paragraph 20 is the lead-based paint disclosure. If the house was built in 1978 or before, make sure that they know they are subject to this. Fill out the appropriate lead-based paint disclosure form. I've got other videos that lay out that form and how that is handled. And do understand also that there is an obligation to fill out that form by the seller. The seller has to sign that first before a buyer. All right. 21 is current liens. Again, is the property, this is just as it sounds. Is the property, do they have a mortgage on it? Or is it, do they not have a mortgage on it, or do they have a mortgage? It's going to be one of those two boxes. They either do or they don't have one. If they do have one, what is the approximate payoff? This doesn't have to be exact, but it's got to be, this is what you're going to be basing your estimated cost sheets off of. So you want to make sure that you know, and what type of loans. I don't know that has when you're selling the house, I don't know if that has a huge impact on what you're doing, but it might. So it's good to know. If there's a second mortgage, you're going to put that here. If they have a HELOC or a second line of credit, that would go here. And then, are they current on all payments? They're also saying that they are not in default and they haven't received any notices about foreclosures or being in default, that there are no other liens against the property for taxes that are unpaid. To the best of their knowledge, there's no judgments against them, and they have not filed for bankruptcy. If any of those statements are not checked, if they're like, well, we did file for bankruptcy, you've got a whole different line of questioning. Get with your broker. Sellers can generally not sell the home while in bankruptcy without getting the court's written approval to sell the home. So make sure that you do, if any of those answers cannot be checked other than these A and B. F through I, I guess. If those cannot be checked, if they are in any of those problematic areas, you need to know about it. Contact a broker, have them contact their attorneys and find out what you do next. If it isn't covered by a loan, the seller will agree to let you know about the information of their lender, account number. We'll go to the settlement agent, everything for payoff. So they're agreeing to work with the settlement company there. And if anything changes, they have an obligation to come back and tell you. That is actually, we had an agent get saved one time because the sellers stopped making mortgage payments after it got listed because they were having financial issues, and they did not tell their agent, and the agent was off the hook for liability and some accusations because they did not know, but the seller failed to tell the listing agent. So the seller's failure to sell because of all the problems they were having was not our fault. It was their fault because they failed to fulfill that clause. If the seller is willing to do financing, in paragraph 22, they're going to say whether they do or don't agree to financing, or if they do or do not agree rather to financing the seller. If the seller says they are amenable or they are interested in seller financing, almost always that house needs to be 100% theirs with no liens encumbered on and no mortgage. It gets very complicated if they do have other mortgages they're paying off and they're going to hold a second note. That's all fine and good. They should contact an attorney, a real estate attorney, who can give them the pros and cons of being the lender. That is not really our position to walk them through that. Their CPA and their attorney, not and their attorney should be talking them through whether it's the best offer before you go offering that to the public. Because you don't want to make that offer to the public. Buyers start coming in with these weird offers and stuff, and now you're telling everybody no because you falsely advertised the position of the seller because they weren't aware of what they were talking about. So again, if they say yes, go talk to an attorney. This is paragraph 23 is a disclosure. The closing costs. This is the seller is aware that there is fees that they will be charged to go to closing. And then what those fees are, and including the grantor's tax. And if they are in Prince William County or north in Virginia, they're going to have the transportation tax as well. So make sure you are discussing this with them. And it is our position at Coldwell Banker Elite that you will be always filling out a seller's estimated cost sheet as part of the listing process, so they get a good idea of what their fees are going to be before they even go active as a listing, and what they may realize in a net at the end. And so you make sure you do that form. We've got tons of tools to do that and resources, and those are done in other videos or classes that we talk about them. Also, seller's proceeds. Again, this is a wet settlement act. I honestly can't tell you how important I think it is that you actually do highlight this paragraph here, explain to them, underwrite it. I don't care what you do. Not every state is a wet settlement state. And what we're telling the sellers here is that if they are selling, they are not going to get their money until after this is recorded. So the buyers will get the keys, and then the settlement company does their job, and then they issue money to the seller by wire or check or however they want it. Now, that is the standard way of doing things. This law was amended several years ago. The buyer and seller can agree to other terms. So if the seller chooses right here and they're like, no, I am not giving my keys until after I have money in my hand, this is the place to discuss that with the seller, because if that is their position, then when we get to ratifying a contract, we are going to write a special element of that contract to say the buyer and seller will agree to close on Wednesday, whatever date. The buyer will not have access to the property until the buyer's settlement company has made recordation and disbursements to the seller, at which time access to the property, keys, codes, and all the rest will be given. If that's the position of the seller, and I have found this personally with a lot, especially my military sellers who have sold in other states where that's not, what settlement account isn't a default. They want their money before they're going to give keys so as to not be burnt. And so you can negotiate that, even though the default is that we typically give keys first and then money later. Paragraph 24, this is the FERC or IRS paragraph. And this is just a quick disclosure that says if the person who is selling the home is subject to the foreign investor tax, there are going to be some withholdings. And so this is when, because I don't want to get too deep in making accusations, I ask every seller the same way every time. Are you subject to the foreign investor tax? They will know if they are or they're not. And if they've never heard of it before, they're not subject to it. And then you're going to check the box and move on. If they are subject to it, again, complete your listing, Have them talk to the appropriate people to get some advice and counsel about what those reserves will be, because the IRS is going to hold money back until the seller files their taxes, and then they'll get the difference back of what was held in deposit by the settlement company. And it's a lot of money. So if their clients are subject to or believe there might be a chance, continue the listing. But before you go active, make sure they've talked to somebody, because that's got to be reflected on your estimate cost sheet, so they know what they're actually going to get at closing, and can they have enough money to pay all their bills to settle the house. Paragraph 25. This is the seller's representation and warranties. This is what the seller is standing by and saying that they can do. This is giving you permission to market the property, that they can convey a good and marketable title, that they are not part of a listing agreement with any other broker at that time. No person or entity has the right to purchase, lease, or acquire property by virtue of option right. There's no first right of refusals from tenants or other business relationships there. The seller is not a real estate agent. The seller doesn't know about the existence of abandoned or underground storage tanks. The property is not currently tenant occupied, or it is. The seller has or has not had recording systems in the property. This is another place to stop and chat with the seller. The seller needs to understand that the recording of audio will violate wiretapping laws. This was something that I pushed hard for the Forms Committee to add to both buyer agency agreements and listing agreements here. And so we're telling the seller here, if you have audio equipment in a house, if you're using your smart cameras to listen and watch, the listening part is against a violation of law. The watching part is perfectly fine inside your home. The listening part gets you in trouble. Again, inside the home. Outside is actually different. So, it's easier to explain to them. It's all recording. So as a result, we are going to be letting everybody know that there's recording and surveillance equipment in the house. And so this is basically consent to, and I put it in the agent to agent comments, and we put little posters outside of the entry point of the house saying, by the way, smile, you're being recorded, or surveillance equipment in the house. By the way, listing and buyer agents, you guys should assume there's like 66% of homes have some level of surveillance in them. You should assume that you're being recorded anytime you're in a house anyways. This paragraph is making known to the seller they cannot, we're not being held liable for this. We are putting them on notice it is unlawful. The way we're circumventing that, not circumventing it, is getting informed consent. We're making a disclosure in the MLS to all potential buyer agents and buyers, and we're putting notices on the door, maybe even a little placard when they walk in, so that they know, and then we're not in trouble. The seller is going to give paragraph B. The seller is going to provide keys to the broker to access the property. And that the seller is allowing unlicensed assistance into the property for ministerial acts. So in other words, to drop off brochures, to do walk through the home without buyers. So if you do have an unlicensed assistant, that paragraph covers you, so your assistant can go do the things they need to do. Not to show property. That is not permitted for unlawful assistance, but other ministerial acts or administrative tasks are. If the property is currently occupied by a tenant, the seller is going to give us, the broker, the current lease agreement, so we can look over them, make sure we're in compliance and staying out of trouble with them. Seller assumption of risk, also important here. The seller is fully responsible for this property. Then they have to keep all the utilities on and maintenance. We are not taking care of their house for them. And then they also should be securing all valuables in the house. Again, this is another good place to chat with them a little bit and tell them, hey, make sure all your stuff is squared away and put away, and no firearms are left out. Everything's locked up. Firearms especially. If they can get them out of the house and have somebody else hold them, that's great and better. But they should not be accessible to any party. They should be locked up. Ammo should be separated from the firearm. Medical bills or any type of bills should be secure, so people can't look through them and get history about them. Nothing should be left on the counter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anything that you can think of to make them safer. We are not responsible for the security of the property or for inspecting it on a periodic basis, unless you agree to those things. So even if it's vacant, we are not responsible for checking in and ensuring the property is good. If you are, make sure you put it in writing that what your frequency and obligations are. All right, and in consideration for this, for our services, the seller and their heirs and assigns release the broker, designees, agents, and all the rest, MLSs and everybody else. from any liability except for malfeasance, unless you do something negligent or harmful to them, or any liability for vandalism, theft, damage, or whatever. And just recently we had someone, their house got broken into and they want to know if we were going to take care of it. No, we're not taking care of replacing the windows and doors that were broken when you got broken into. That wasn't our fault. Certainly we didn't do it. That paragraph covers you for that. Paragraph 26 is a reminder that we are real estate agents. We are not other things. We're not accountants. We're not attorneys. We're not foundation experts. They should contact those people to get advice for that. Service providers, this is our hold harmless paragraph, that from time to time we are going to be referring them to service providers, contractors, helpers, or all those people that we can, that it is up to the seller to research those people. They can Google them. They can look for, they can look online at like Yelp and all the rest and get ratings. They can pick their own people. They don't have to work with our recommendations in order to work with us. So all those disclosures and miscellaneous B are, again, the negligent referral thing, trying to get us off the hook for one of the most common lawsuits against real estate agents is you recommend this person, they cause us damage. This is saying we're not responsible for those. We're not warranting their work, and they can choose anybody. They don't have to use our people. Paragraph C is the wire fraud. It's very lengthy, good. It should be. Big problem right now is email fraud and wire fraud with sellers, especially they're being targeted. This is a paragraph you must go through the sellers and go, look, if money is going to be wired, you need to hear my voice or the attorney's voice about those instructions. Do not just randomly wire from links in an email. Spend a couple minutes with your sellers, showing them how much you're really worried about their safety and security of their family by explaining to them what wire fraud is and how buyers and sellers are being targeted, and not to click any links they don't recognize. That's not how this works. And you and a settlement company will give them verbal instructions when they are sending over instructions for wire transfers and other information. D is another reminder that if they want to accept an offer other than one they have on the table, they've already ratified, and a new offer comes in, they need to talk to an attorney. E is to remind them that this is all subject to the Commonwealth of Virginia laws and enforcement. F, this is a binding contract. This isn't just random agreements. This is a contract between us and the broker, and it has terms and conditions set out that in writing that are applied to here. There's nothing we are promising to do for them that isn't in writing that we are obligated to. Paragraph 27 is our attorney fee paragraph. If there is a lawsuit between the seller and the brokerage, that the winning party gets all their legal fees paid as well, and we are obligated to try mediation before we go through a lawsuit. Now, when I'm talking to sellers, I essentially say, look, here, paragraph 27 is rarely ever used, but if there is a dispute between us, we will first try mediation. If mediation doesn't work, and then you do, for whatever reason, I can't imagine a reason, but you ever do find a reason to sue me, whoever wins gets their legal fees as well. And I wouldn't linger on this too long. I wouldn't read verbatim all this stuff. I would just tell them that there is a remedy here in case there ever is a legal challenge between our representation or we don't get along. We're first going to try to mediate and fix things. If they do decide to sue us, then paragraph 27 kicks in. Paragraph 28 is any special or unusual firms and terms that weren't pre-printed, any strange, weird things that you and your clients agreed to would go in there. Seller needs to sign. The broker needs to sign. This is not for you, the salesperson. This is for your broker to sign authorizing this. Under this bar here, this is not contractual information. So this is simply contact information for the supervising broker and for you, the agent, in terms. And that's it. That is the listing agreement. Now, clearly, there are other addendums and terms I referenced here. We will do videos on those, or I'll probably already have done videos on a lot of those things you can go back and look at. If you have any questions, get with your brokers, your brokers, or supervisors and mentors to find out strange and unique questions you have. But that is the down and dirty of the listing agreement. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, you know who to reach out to. Thanks.